Hi, good afternoon. My name is Talbot Brooks, and I'm the president for the Geospatial Information Technology Association. We are just thrilled to death to be able to bring y'all today's webinar presentation, which is using oblique imagery for pipeline integrity management. Our guest presenter, David Petterson, is highly qualified and quite a knowledgeable guy on this stuff. He completed his bachelor's degree in geomatics at the University of Melbourne, Australia, so you might need a translator. He does have a bit of an accent, at least I do living down here in the South. David's been working in large-scale asset infrastructure markets for a variety of utility and transportation organizations across several countries, including Australia, Canada, and the U.S. These projects have varied from the collection of field data from a helicopter across the outback of Australia to performing clearance mapping from a high rail vehicle in central Canada in the middle of the winter. That's fun, doesn't it? David received his GISP in 2012 and currently serves as product manager for EagleView's infrastructure division, focusing on solutions for electrical utilities and the oil and gas markets. His presentation today is going to deal, as noted, with oblique imagery for pipeline integrity management. In short, he says that currently, accurate HCA analysis for pipeline integrity management programs requires extensive field work coupled with orthoimagery and other data sources. Oblique or angled imagery has been shown to dramatically reduce field visits while increasing HCA verification accuracy. High-resolution obliques allow users to clearly identify habitable versus non-habitable structures, places of public meeting, as well as buildings that are 4 stories or more. Oblique imagery also has the benefit of being a referable data source compared to field reports and can be used throughout the enterprise for general day-to-day applications. With that in mind, then, please join me in welcoming David. David, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Talbot. I appreciate that. I've often been told that my accent is more southern than yours, for instance. So, it's always a good start. So, yeah, hopefully you won't need to interpret too much of what we do, and a lot of this will just be very informative for you. So, thanks very much for the introduction, and let me take it away from there. So, as suggested, my name's David Petterson, and what we'd like to discuss with you guys today is just running through a couple of things. So, we mentioned this term metric oblique imagery, and so really what I'm going to do with this presentation is just talk about metric oblique imagery and why that might be a little different. And then I really want to just talk around how our customers, or how we see our customers doing things today. And then what we'd like to do is sort of apply some of the lessons that we've learned and where this concept of metric oblique imagery has been incredibly useful for streamlining some of their workflows and helping our customers out in doing the work that they do on a daily basis. Some of the things that you already mentioned that I'd like to touch back upon is basically the benefits and uses of this oblique and high-resolution ortho imagery and the importance of a referable data source. I'll probably just finish up with just looking at one of our particular use cases, and then just some of the, maybe buyer beware or do's and don'ts of when you're looking at the concept of oblique imagery. So hopefully with that in mind, let me start. Under a full disclaimer here, I just want to say I'm from EagleView Pictometry. Pictometry has been around since 2000, and they've built up its industry expertise by servicing the Tax and Emergency Services Department for local county governments. And the whole purpose of that was for the remote property identification and property appraisal, which hopefully you can see is going to have a lot of parallels with what we're going to talk about today. EagleView was launched in 2008 and basically took that data content that Pictometry produced and was building out very, very accurate polygons or building representations that it used to service the roofing and insurance markets. In 2013, January this year, the two companies have provided to basically become a one-stop shop for content and data creation of a very authoritative and accurate nature. So, like I said, I'm a product manager that I service the infrastructure component, and it's a pleasure to talk to you all today. Okay, so let's get into this. What is a metric oblique image? So, many of you might be familiar with imagery that comes in from an angle. It's shot from, say, a 40-degree angle. The difference between that and a metric oblique is metric oblique enables the user to interactively measure any particular aspect of that image without other supporting data, like without a LiDAR data set or without stereo pair. From a single image, you can make direct measurements. I'm going to get a bit more into that, but let's talk about that a bit more, like in terms of this concept of oblique. And this is an exercise I love to throw out there because in infrastructure, day in and day out, we're always looking at the imagery and we're always looking at it from an orthogonal perspective. And so typically when I give this presentation, I'd love to ask the audience, can anyone just quickly tell me what is this and where is this feature? Now, there might be a bunch of you that can look at this and go, I know exactly what that is and where that is. But the first time I looked at this, I'm doing an interpretation. I'm looking at this feature. I was looking at some of the objects that are in that feature. It seems to be a rocky outcrop. There's some sort of structure there. There's a building. The whole concept is my mind is doing some sort of interpretation of this image. And that's what you're doing with orthogonal imagery or that top-down imagery every day. You don't get a true user's perspective. So now let me give you an oblique perspective. Now, I'm hoping that instantly most of you recognized this particular feature, which is obviously Mount Rushmore. And the key differential is that it didn't take you any time at all to interpret what you are seeing in that imagery. And this holds true to a lot of the workflows that our customers or anyone who's using oblique imagery will face because they're seeing a natural perspective of what they're typically used to looking at. Now, the key difference between this oblique and, this metric oblique and a normal oblique is every pixel within this image is measurable. So it's not just a distance or an area that I could accurately extract from this image, but I can also measure heights as well. And once again, that certainly definitely has play into the pipeline integrity space when we're looking at buildings. So once again, this is just one perspective. So if you think about the capture and collection of imagery, so you've got an orthogonal image, and then typically when you've got metric oblique imagery, there's either a three-way or a four-way image of that. So you can see that you're getting multiple perspectives of that image. Because sometimes just looking at one facade, and for instance, if you're looking at something from the road, you might not get a full vantage point of what that object is. And sometimes being able to see around the back of objects is, it's sometimes the key to deciphering what you're actually looking at. And we've got a couple of use cases that we're going to talk about where our customers have actually applied this. One other thing I want to talk about, a metric oblique versus a consumer grade oblique. Typically, and almost 99% of all GIS systems deal with a square grid or a grid system. So in order for you to get an oblique image into a gridded system, you have to warp that image. And what this does is it actually distorts the true nature of the oblique. And so you can see that I've got an example here of you've got a distorted image on the left and then a natural perspective image on the right. You can see on the left, the buildings are sort of leaning in. That's because they've taken a natural oblique, but then they've warped it to try and fit a two-dimensional ground plane. And so because you've got that, you've taken any of the accuracy out of that image and really made it a consumer-grade picture. And so that's the big difference between a warped image versus a very accurate oblique that you can reference that's got geospatial information embedded in the actual pixels themselves. Okay, so hopefully that just gives you, a sort of a broad overview as to oblique imagery, and we're going to talk about its use cases a bit more as we go through. But let's talk about how this is all relevant to what our customers do in relation to pipeline integrity management. Now, a lot of you are all far more experts than me in this area when it comes to classifying your pipelines, especially under the HCA requirements. What we do know, and what we've seen from our customers constantly, is these are the typical requirements, and I don't need to reiterate these too much, but I do want to sort of just touch on a few. The first one is the concept of digitizing the parcel structure that's contained within your intersect of study. So we know that there's several methods by which people do that, and we're going to touch on that pretty soon, because that's important. And then the next, really, you can see the next 3 or 4 lines, and if I go to the next slide, this is all about interpretation and defining the use case of that identified site. So what are people doing in that building or on that piece of property? Because obviously, and as we all know, all of these things will basically come down to a point where we need to determine Are they occupied? Are they habitable? And that feeds into that system of, as we know, classifying the pipeline in terms of its high occupancy location. So all of those slides that we just went through are trying to identify the use type. And so once again, we've been working with a lot of our customers and just seeing how they've been doing this. And maybe this workflow is similar to yours and maybe it's not. So let me just talk about what we've seen, some of the common issues are with solving this particular problem of identifying the use case. So firstly, the thing that we've seen the most is people are getting very good at getting ortho imagery of their service territory or their area of interest. Usually this is around a 1 foot GSD, sometimes it's 18 inches, sometimes it's 2 feet. And sometimes they're using the freely available NAPE imagery, which can be up to a 1 meter GSD. And so what you get is, obviously, it's an image, it's a background layer that you can refer to, and people are starting to use that as a base, if you will, for defining the structures that are on or near their property. Now, what we've seen is a combination. Some people will drop points where there's a dwelling, but polygonize buildings of interest, CIMs, and gathering areas. Other people will polygonize the entire lot, so they'll polygonize dwellings and everything. So there's a bit of a difference between the way everyone defines this. Now, as you can imagine, you're taking these polygons, but you're looking at this resolution, so really what you need is extensive field verification. You need to generate maps, and then you need to send boots on the ground, people out in the field, to go and verify all the structures to make sure that all those tables that we just flicked through are correct in the assumptions that we've made, to the best of our ability. So what are some of the issues with this? Well, let's talk about that. So the low resolution imagery, it doesn't allow you to accurately determine occupancy. And when I say that, you can see there's a big red circle around the image that I've just shown here. I'm going to refer to that in a use case a bit further on in the presentation, but I want to keep that in mind, that when you're looking at pretty low resolution imagery, all you're really getting is a sense of there is something there or there's not something there. It doesn't help you tell the story of what that something is. The secondary point I've outlined there is it's all to do with the placement and polygonization of these structure points. And I'm going to talk about this one for a little bit because I think this has a lot of relevance moving forward. When you drop a structure point on an object and it's representing a polygon, then that point may, especially on the fringes of your area of interest, may or may not be inside that boundary. So you might be missing buildings that are there, or you might be getting too many depending on where that structure point is. So that's one area of concern when we talk about dropping just a point to represent a structure. The other thing is when you've got very low resolution imagery, and I'll have another example of this in a minute, you're trying to basically draw a polygon around a blob. And so when it comes time the next year to determine whether that blob has changed or has something else happened that blob is now, it went from a 2-story to a 4-story building, it's very difficult to detect the deltas in that change when you start with a very, very rudimentary data set. So hopefully, as you'll see here, moving to obliques and high resolutions can solve some of this problem. And then the third part, of course, is the field personnel. You're generating a lot of maps, a lot of paper maps. And the guys and the team members are going out there into the field. They're recording a lot of information on these maps. Some of it's digital, some of it's not. We know for a fact that a lot of people have to head out into areas where it's pretty remote and disconnected. So you're relying on a lot of these maps to come back, to be collated, and then to basically get updated and put back into your GIS. This is quite an extensive workflow, and one where we've seen over time it can tend to suffer because you get basically bottlenecks in the distribution and the delivery. So if you've got audit requirements or regulatory requirements that you need to meet, that can be a huge bottleneck in some of these workflows. So there's some of the common issues. So let's talk about how we've resolved some of these issues. So firstly, let me just talk about that second point that we talked about, which was the polygonization and dropping data points. In this particular example that I'm showing, you've got something like probably 12 or 18-inch imagery on the left versus around a 6-inch image on the right. The first thing you can notice is that you've got a much clearer definition of what that building actually, is or looks like. You can see the structure much clearly. If you draw your attention to the bottom left of that structure, you can see in the one on the left, when I drew this outline, and I just drew this over the imagery, so I do apologize for any of it looking a bit shady, but if I was looking at that image and I'm trying to draw a polygon around it, I might include that structure at the bottom left-hand corner, because I'm not sure if it's truly attached or if it's part of that structure. If you look in the right image, you can absolutely see that that structure is a separate structure from the main structure. And so straight away, that whole classification there, if you're being conservative, might change your proximity to the pipeline depending on when your pipeline is. So if I was looking at that polygon thinking to myself, well, it's quite a large building, obviously that's going to affect the class of my line. If that inclusion has now meant that you're closer or you're within your area of interest, then that could definitely change the classification. So now this is where the sort of power of the oblique comes into. I'm trying to identify what this structure is, and especially what is that little structure there on the left-hand side. If I just move to the next slide quickly, we can see here that the oblique image of, this is a metric oblique image of that same area, clearly shows that it's a shed of some description. So, straight away you might be able to, obviously we'd polygonize that, but you could attribute it correctly to determine that, okay, it's very separate from this structure and it might change your particular class. The secondary part of this building is, I can see some serious shadow. And once again, I'm doing an interpretation. I'm trying to work out how big is this building. Because if I need to send someone out there or make a call to verify, once again, I'm moving outside of this workflow of trying to classify this stuff to try and validate and verify. So if I move the oblique over a little, I can see that clearly the structure is 4 stories, or it's actually over 4 stories. And I can always do a height measurement check on it. Now, this is very important where we see some buildings that can be difficult to discern, if there's no obvious windows or if it's a completely glassed building, it might be difficult to discern how many stories this building is. By doing a quick height measurement check on the building, you can pretty much do an accurate measure to say, okay, this is 60 feet, and we know that, based on most story buildings, this would qualify as being over 4 stories. So having metric oblique into the picture starts to take the guesswork out of the imagery. If I just move back to that original one, takes all the guesswork out of what are you looking when you look at this particular object. So that is one measure. Once again, it's using imagery from multiple sides to clearly identify a structure and be able to attribute it correctly. Some of the other common things that we've noticed, and this is use cases that our customers have told us, is that when they're out there looking at this imagery, they're always looking for things, CIMs, areas of partial mobility. So looking at church, very much easier to define when you can see structures and when you're not trying to interpret shadows on the roof. Other things that are difficult to ascertain are any sort of gathering areas. So we've found that sometimes, what may look like just a mowed lawn could be actually, obviously, a playing field or something else that indicates that, there's a lot more activity going on in this location than currently meets the eye. So there we go. We talked about, just in general how this metric imagery is used. What I want to touch on now is this concept of a referable data source. And so this is pretty key, and it ties back into the 3 main points we were making earlier with regards to identification of the site, the ability to polygonize that accurately and track deltas. And the next thing is we need a source that we know we can come back to, especially when it comes to being audited. So if we talk about a referable data source, what we're saying here is something that is it's dated. We know the date that the imagery was taken. It's georeferenced, so we know its positional or accurate location is correct, and its primary source. So it is the primary source of the imagery. It's not a report, or it's not 2 or 3 levels down the food chain of identifying what that actual that building was. And this way it can be independently validated as well, based on the conclusions that you or someone else may have made. So where and why is this important? Well, let's think about it. Let's say you've used consumer-grade imagery. Just you've grabbed some free stuff, or somebody's used a web service off the internet to pull in imagery as a backdrop. Well, if you use that imagery, then that's great. You might have maybe drawn some lines from it, and then you've made some maps and you've gone out into the field. If it comes back through the audit time and someone's saying, well, hold on, it's now very different to what you guys mapped. Can you show us what you used as your reference material? If you go back and use a free, I'm saying a free web mapping service, the imagery on that may have changed in the 12 months or 18 months. They actually might have more updated imagery. They might have some other imagery. Maybe it was newer imagery, but they got older, better resolution imagery, and they decided to serve that up. So if you can't go back to that original data source, then it makes for a very, very complex audit trail. And so once again, if something's changed in between this analysis period, obviously there could be penalties. Even if you were correct in the first round, if you've got no proof of the trail, it may make for embarrassing questions later on. So this is why we say that having a good primary data source as the backbone to begin a lot of this work, and that's what we've seen. A lot of our customers, they've sort of done this, and I don't want to say piecemeal, it's just they've done what they can with what they had over time. Now we're seeing more the fact that they would like to get a good snapshot, a good primary snapshot of what they have, so that they can continue to track deltas and track changes much more readily as they go through year on year. Okay, so I just want to talk about a quick use case here, and this is one we did with Cheniere Energy. Cheniere was putting together a state-of-the-art integrity management system, and really what they wanted as the backbone of their system was this base map, an ortho imagery base map of their entire service territory. Very similar to what you just saw in that 6-inch image that I just showed you. They wanted really good imagery that they could go through and they could start to build out. What they found was that they were using this ortho imagery as their reference point and still sort of doing the day-to-day things that they'd been doing with relation to sending people out in the field and collating or doing conflation of their existing data to the data that we were providing as well. As they were going through, they started to look at the oblique imagery, especially the fact that it's metric oblique imagery. They started to be able to measure directly from their area of interest of the corridors to see what was in their corridor, what they thought they'd classified. And this is coming back now to that example that I showed you earlier. And that was the one where we had this particular barn. Hopefully you can see that barn down on the left-hand side. When this was originally done, and I say barn because they originally classified this structure as a barn. It sort of looked like, well, there's a driveway that goes up to the house, and there's two sort of sheds or utility sheds either side. And that's how this was classified, with all the knowledge they had at hand at the time. When they went out there to do some field verification, they said, well, hold on, that's definitely not a barn. And, that's multi-unit dwellings right there, and we didn't have that in our system. So they brought up the oblique imagery at the location, and sure enough, this is the image on the right-hand side that you can see. Now, I've only got the one shot there, but what they were able to do is actually see multiple sides of that building structure. And from it, they were able to determine, well, actually, it's got each building has two electrical boxes. So each of those dwellings is a multi-unit family dwelling. And you can also see that there was trampolines situated there as well. So straight away, they realized, well, hold on, we could have used the oblique imagery to identify this site correctly before even going into the field. Once they hit upon that, they went through a process of using the oblique imagery to go through and update and validate their entire network. And now they've basically got their system where an ongoing flight and then doing the change analysis makes for a very, very quick turnaround for them to go and do their inspection of their lines for their pipeline integrity use. And so their time to do that has dramatically increased. And this is all about moving forward into having a world-class integrity system. Okay. So I'm starting to wrap up here, and I noticed that there's a few questions that might be popping up. What I wanted to do was just go through some of the, call it buyer beware, do's and don'ts, or what to look for when you're looking at oblique imagery, and especially as I wanted to show you one or two more slides with regards to workflow. And then definitely if you have questions, and I think, Talbot, you're pinging me there a few times, I'd be happy to answer questions as well. So let me start to wrap up here. What to look for when acquiring oblique imagery. So you heard me talk about tracking deltas, tracking changes, and the importance of getting a good polygon representation of that building that's an accurate spatial footprint in relation to your pipeline. What we have found is that the 6-inch GSD provides a really good balance between cost, swath width, and just detail of what our customers are trying to achieve. Obviously, you can fly a lot higher detail. You can get down to the 2- and 3-inch detail, but it tends not to be cost. It tends to be cost prohibitive. Whereas, when you're getting into that 12- and 18-inch imagery, it will be less. It'll be cheaper. But once again, you're trying to get a good blend of reducing the amount of time or reducing the amount of windshield time that field workers are doing. So. And then in terms of the swath width, what we've seen is it's that issue where a lot of customers are trying to start to get a good baseline of what they have in a good spatial context. How accurately are those objects placed in relation to the center line of my pipeline? So we've noticed customers start off a little wider, but as they go around, the next go around, they actually might go smaller swath width and higher resolution. So that's always been an interesting progression of the imagery as you go through this sort of exercise. The other thing is the absolute accuracy. So obviously the plus or minus 10 feet can definitely impact your radius estimates. You saw that example where if that shed was included as part of that polygon, then potentially there's a potential there for that building to be included as part of the classification. So a plus or minus 3 feet is a far better sort of accuracy to get that comfortability that when you're running these analysis, that the spatial accuracy meets what you need. Some of the other bigger things are more to do with logistics. Capture timelines. You've only got 12 months in order to typically validate and verify a large network. And so you want to make sure that whoever you're getting to do this work or that imagery, that they've got the ability to service that they can put the aircraft in the air, they can meet deadlines, and they can make sure that they can meet your regulatory submissions. So always an important task to make sure that, hey, you're not going to get stuck here halfway through a project and not have the resources to carry it out. And this is a big one that we see all the time, is that how will that imagery be deployed? And how will the information and data that you're getting, will it benefit anyone else in your organization? And just a key example of this is, especially when it comes to metric oblique, you don't want to spend the money on that sort of solution and then have it just sit under a box or in someone's desk and no one else gets to use it. What we've found is that making sure that metric oblique is completely consumable within the workflows that you're doing, making sure that everyone in the organization can get access to it, it starts to leverage or enhance that investment that you're making, to do your day-to-day work, but to making sure that, hey, it's going to benefit other people in your organization. And typically communication is one of the greatest things that, can prevent issues in an organization. So we like to make sure that, when you're out there, make sure that you're able to integrate that imagery fully with your workflows and what you're trying to do. And then in terms of the comparisons, obviously, things are going to vary a lot when it comes to metric oblique imagery. You're talking about imagery collected from aircraft. So are there fairing fees? Are there delivery fees, deployment fees? There's obviously price gouging and other ongoing costs that it's like anything. Make sure you've been very upfront, and we'll be basically facilitating when you get that bid or when you put something out, just make sure everything's a true comparison. And then, like I said, the last couple of points there, make sure your capture parameters and accuracies meet the requirements that you need. Often we see customers put out accuracy requirements or capture parameters that they're sort of based on cost, or they're based on an assumption of cost in terms of, hey, we don't want to spend too much money, so we're asking for not the cheapest thing possible, but we're asking for someone to give us a data set that might not necessarily be useful for them year after year after year. And we hate to see customers invest in their money, whoever that may be, and not be able to reuse that data year after year after year. So asking, confirming your capture parameters, and then talking about delivery timeframes and collection, these are just all important things to understand when it comes to the comparison of different data sets and different vendors. Now, I have my summary to my final three, and then I believe that we've got a bunch of questions there which I'm more than looking forward to answering and can go back and forward at this time. So just final three things here. The concept of metric oblique, this is a proven solution, not just in pipeline integrity management. It's been proven in tax assessment, emergency services, insurance, in so many other avenues that it saves a lot of money and ROI and windshield time. And we've seen many customers make that determination where they're like, you know what, if we fly this and fly it correctly, then the money that we save by not having that sheer volume of windshield time has proven itself out, especially when margins are tight. The second point to just harp on here is make sure you want an accurate referable data source, especially when it comes to audit time. We have seen, especially in other industries, where the use of metric oblique imagery has now become synonymous with it's a straight-out audit check. If an auditor knows that they use metric oblique imagery in order to undertake that field verification, there's a comfort factor with the auditors in those industries that they know that that solution is referable, it's auditable, and you could take it to court. And that's the sort of solution that our customers who are looking to mitigate risk are interested in. And then the final one, it's a very, very when it's done correctly, it's a very cost-effective and efficient means at detecting changes, is comparing deltas year after year. And we see that a lot, is that concept of change detection and moving from year after year. And it starts with a good referable data set that's been done correctly. And once you've established that, then the rest starts to flow. So I thank you for your time. I wanted to make sure that everyone's time here is valuable, and you got the key parts of my message. And like I said, I believe there's a bunch of questions coming through. So this time I'd love to open it up back to Talbot, and yeah, let's take it from there.
Hey, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for your presentation. GITA really appreciates it. Before we get to the questions, too, I want to encourage listeners to help us support programming like this. Boy, I sound kind of like a PBS fundraiser here. But please do become a member of GITA. Visit www.gita.org and sign up as a member. You'll also find on our website that we are recording these webinars and making them available after the fact so you can share them with others that you're working with. Andy, this comes from Tammy. She'd like to know, do you leverage drone technology in doing this, these data collects?
Oh, good question. Currently, and I can only speak for myself here, I do know of others who are exploring drone technology. And here's the two parts of my knowledge that I'm going to put out there. I actually really, and this is I'm going to start with a personal thing. I love the concept of drone technology. I think it is very cool. And now here's the bad part for us currently. I still believe we're a couple of years out on FAA regulations for making sure we can get the drones that we need out and about and for detecting that sort of information. The biggest thing is the cost right now. So if you look at companies like Pictometry, and I know there's several others, we use light aircraft. And they're safe, reliable, and they're flying day to day. And typically you can put 20 to 25 Cessnas in the air, capturing the same amount of information as one drone. So right now, and for this amount of time, We haven't seen drones enter the marketplace where they're economically feasible, but I definitely see the day where they could be a very big part of continuing operation, especially when it comes to potentially monthly, inspections of pipelines or things of that nature.
Hey, just for reference on that, folks need to know if they want to go out and collect like this, they can get authorization to use a drone in one of two ways. The first is kind of as the amateur hobbyist, where you promise that you're not reselling or performing it really as a service, and you have to keep your drone or your copter under 400 feet or some relatively low ceiling. The other is to work directly with the FAA, and this is usually more easily done through a university, where we can get permission to plot out collection grids and coordinate with air traffic control and do all that kind of jazz in a collaborative endeavor. So find your local university if you're interested in the drone game. Their approval process is quite easy. Another question for you here is, if a company is trying to plan out, geez, where do I need to collect this information? How do I do it? Is there some type of flight planning consideration that could go into helping them control their costs in terms of prioritizing how and where the data is collected?
Sure. Typically, when we're dealing with most customers, we start out with, what's their service territory? What are their pipeline center lines? What's their area of interest? Now, I can only speak for us personally, but we have many customers who choose to obviously start with their transmission first because, they're trying to mitigate risk here. So they'll start with their transmission first and then maybe tend to broaden out into distribution. What we do find is with distribution, that happens where there are people, that sort of makes sense. And so for us as a company personally, we've typically amassed imagery, especially where there's populated areas. So we tend to work with our customers to generate an area of interest in a flight and then talk to them about their ongoing footprint of what they actually need. So this tends, if someone's starting from scratch, that's the typical way we'd start that process off.
And then lastly, what are some common mistakes you see with folks coming in trying to acquire oblique metric imagery?
In terms of mistakes of once they've acquired the imagery?
Well, they're not necessarily thinking about the true value or what can be done with it. They want it for one purpose and don't necessarily know it can be used for several, or they're, as you indicated, maybe collecting parts of their network first and then expanding it to other areas, and it ends up being duplicative or just,
Yeah, sure, some of the general traps. So there's a couple, and it might be reiterating a few things, so I do apologize, but one of the big things that we see a lot is that in any infrastructure utility, a lot of the times people are doing a certain project. And pipeline integrity management could be treated as a project. And if I just back up one slide here, this is a perfect example. It's a perfect example where someone's said, okay, I need to go out and I need to perform this particular work. And what we do find is anyone who's either getting imagery or oblique imagery, if they haven't judged the need of, okay, I'm just going to get it for me, that's great. Being able to push it out on an enterprise-wide solution so that everyone gets access to it, that's a trap that we see all the time. And we see it because, customers have bought into the oblique technology, but, didn't realize that they could push it out through their enterprise. And so when it comes time to, do it again next year, and once again, we all know that, we're always looking for funding sources, and we're always trying to get better benefits or cost benefits across an organization. So if people that are making this investment don't know that they could leverage that data through existing workflows and that other people in the organization could do it, then that's a big sort of trap that we see a lot. The secondary one is the one that I talked about earlier, is that they want to make a move into establishing a baseline of that, the spatial representations of the polygons, and they tend to just, well, we don't know what we're doing, so let's just start, and we'll start drawing polygons, and then they get to the next year and find, or the next year, and then they find that, well, those polygons aren't as accurate as we want them to be because now we can't track change. So now all that effort and money you paid to get that polygon drawn is it's wasted. So the information attached to it is not, and so that information can be spatially joined to a new polygon, so that's okay, we see that. But if you could mitigate that at the outset, if you could mitigate that for your customers and say, hey, it might be worth just just not investing, just calling, find out who does this service for, and then see how much it is, because for what they're paying for a very coarse polygon, they might actually be able to get a really accurate polygon for a similar price. So that's one of those buyer beware. Just make some calls is all I would suggest on that one, and that's actually a really big one that we do see a lot of the time.
David, we really thank you for your time and attention. Unless I get any last-minute questions here, this will be the end of our webinar today. And again, we encourage everybody, please do join GITA, become a member. It's tremendously worth it. You get wonderful webinar presentations like this, and we continue to make additional content available. And we'd also love to see everybody on the call. Please join us in Houston for the Oil and Gas Pipeline Conference, the 28th through the 31st of October at the Royal Sonesta Hotel. The event is posted on our website, and we'd love to have you there. And lastly, David, what's an easy way for folks to get a hold of you if they want to follow up afterwards here?
Let me just push through the last slide. You can contact me there, david.petterson@pictometry.com. You can see our website information there. And we will also be at Houston, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you guys there and all of you at JITA as well.
Absolutely fantastic. I'll give folks a minute or so to write this down and to get over to the GITA page and sign up. And thanks again.
Great, Talbot. Thanks for having us on today.